Hello, and welcome to GreyNoise University. I'm Brad Chiappetta, and this module is part of our GreyNoise API and CLI training series. In this module, we will begin covering the GNQL Query endpoint and reviewing examples. The GNQL Query endpoint is used to ask questions or query the GreyNoise Internet Scanner dataset. The endpoint allows queries to be submitted using the same GreyNoise query language searches that the GreyNoise visualizer uses. The GNQL documentation provides a full list of all the fields that can be used in a query along with some examples. You can also use the GreyNoise visualizer to build the query syntax off of common attributes. If I click on the Today link at the top of the visualizer, then click on a classification, then click on a destination country, I can see that the GNQL query syntax is populated in the search bar. The GNQL query endpoints use a GET request and require a query value in the input to be functional. The query parameter gets appended to the API URL. Because of this, it is important to ensure that the query is properly encoded. The API reference page will provide an example of how this works. For example, we can enter the query we created on the visualizer onto the reference page, then view the request sample, where we can see the encoded values for things like spaces, which is a %20, and colon, which is a %3a. For usage monitoring, this endpoint consumes one search for each IP returned in the data section of the response. This can be limited by using the size parameter to ensure the number of results is as expected. This endpoint will return a status of 200, meaning that the query request was successful, of 400, meaning there was an error with the request, such as a bad query, of 401, meaning that the API key provided was not valid, or of 429 if the daily rate limit was reached. Since the endpoint returns a 200 value for queries with a valid entry in the query field, it is important to review the context of the message to confirm if there were no results found. If we click the Try It button, we can review the endpoint response based on the query provided. In addition to the required parameter query, there are two additional parameters, size and scroll. The size parameter takes an integer value between 1 and 10,000 and is used to limit the number of IP objects included in the data section of the response. If the total count of IPs for a query exceeds the size parameter, only the first set of results are returned. This can be useful to control the size of the data returned by the API when processing large datasets. The scroll parameter takes in the scroll value from the previous request to fetch the next page of data. For example, if the size parameter of 10 was used and there were 15 results found, the first page of the results would contain the first 10 results, and the scroll token would be used to retrieve the next page, which would include the second set of results. Let's run the query in the CLI by copying the curl command from the API docs and pasting it into our terminal. I'm going to use a tool called JQ to help make the output easier to read. In the response, you can see at the top level we get some basic information about the query submitted, including what the query was, a scroll token, and a count of IP addresses the query returns, which is not the same as the number of IP addresses included in the data section, and the data section object, which includes the full IP response for every IP address that matches the query. The response for each IP in the data object matches that of the data returned in the IP context endpoint. The message key will also let you know if the query contained no results or was incorrect. This concludes the training module. If you have any questions on the topics covered, please reach out to support@greynoise.io.